Welcome to the Educator Collaborative Fall Gathering 2021. I'm so excited that you are giving us your most valuable uh, thing. It would be your time. You don't have to, even in your pajamas, you don't have to engage with us on this day of learning, whether you're with us on the Saturday, the day that it was released, this day of learning has been released, or whether you're doing it at another time. We truly appreciate you just allowing us to be a part of your learning. So my name is Dr. Towanda Harris, and I decided to do a session entitled As the World Turns. So if you are my age, or if you are a little bit older, then you are very familiar with the famous show As the World Turns. And I titled this because this was a show that was filled with drama, that was filled with uncertainty, that was filled with a whole lot of things that came up, kind of like domino effects. And so thinking about where we are right now in education, that we are still not in the clear, that the pandemic is still very real. This is something that kind of came to mind as the world continues to turn, as the world continues to go on. What are we doing? How do we create spaces for our students and their voices and experiences within our classroom? So just really quickly at the beginning, I wanted to just make mention, if you're going to retweet, if you're going to share, if you are going to post or do anything, we ask that you use the hashtag the EdCollab Gathering, and then also hashtag the right tools. And my Twitter handle is at Dr. T. Harris. So I want to start off with these wonderful pictures. These are three pictures that kind of summarize who I am as an educator. The first being a picture of my parents. My dad, he retired from the school system as a custodian, and my mom retired from the school system as a secretary for the superintendent. My dad has an education that ended in, he has an 8th grade education, and then my mom has a high school diploma. And the question comes, why do I bring this up? Well, thinking about some of the assumptions and some of the conclusions that are drawn about families with limited education, it kind of hurts my heart when it comes to what the thought is around the limitations that could come upon the very children that are in that household. I am the youngest of 8 children. My children are the youngest of 22 grandchildren. We have a very, very large family. And so growing up, we understood that community was important, and my parents made it a point to surround us with individuals that could help us to be our best selves. They knew exactly where their limits were, where they kind of where they weren't able to give us experiences that maybe that we needed at the time. And so from that, I thought about that as an educator. How do I surround my children with others that maybe I can't get them there, or that I am kind of like reaching the max of what I can do, that there are others that can pour into my students as well. And so I thought about that when I was in the classroom, of different ways that I can partner with families, that I can partner with communities, that I can partner with the PE coach, that I can partner with the art teacher, the counselor, all of those individuals to help my children become their best selves. And then the next picture is a picture of my family. This picture is a very old picture, and it is a picture that makes me smile, as you can see, from ear to ear, because it shows the 3 very different personalities that my children kind of entail. And my husband and I, we've been married for 20 years. Yes, very, very long time, 20 beautiful years. And from that, we have absolutely no manual on how to parent. And so the question is, as we go into the classroom, you think about that thing, that very thing. There's no manual on how to do it right. You get it right one year, and then now it's time to rip it up or revisit it. And so that manual is constantly in draft mode. It is a fluid type of manual, kind of like parenting. You get it right with one child, you need to rip it up and start over again with the next child. And so that's one of the things that I brought into education, really trying to think about ways that I can really customize the learning experiences and all of the things that I kind of plan for year to year. How do I make sure that they are for the very individuals that are before me that particular year? And then lastly, here's a picture of my dog. His name is Charger, not because he charges anyone, but because he is named after the San Diego Chargers. My brother, he played for the San Diego Chargers and he passed away of Lou Gehrig's disease. So in honor of him, we named our dog Charger. Now, Charger, and dogs in particular, I was extremely afraid of dogs. I mean, it was pretty sad. And so because of that, I realized it was because I had no experience with dogs. When I was raised, dogs were on the outside of the house. They were in the backyard. They never really interacted with families on the inside. And so because of that, I had no idea how the temperament of dogs, when they wagged their tail, that they wanted to play, and that when they came running toward you, wasn't because they wanted to attack you, but because they wanted to just kind of engage with you. And so I had to go through the process of getting outside of my comfort zone in order to learn the behaviors and the temperament of dogs. How often do we have to do that as a teacher? Every year, our children come to us with different experiences. And we know that the world wants us to believe this false narrative about who they are before we even meet them. This false narrative of what their temperament is and how they don't care about learning and how their families are lacking and they can't give them all that they need, or how education is not a very important thing in their households. Well, I am here to tell you that those narratives sometimes play into how we treat our students. So just like I had to do with Charger, I had to get outside of my comfort zone and to learn some things that maybe did not make me as comfortable. But I had to do that because I made a commitment to get over this fear that I had, this misunderstanding that I had about dogs. And so as an educator, there are so many things that we need to do, get outside of our comfort zone. And that might mean that we might have some tough conversations, or we might engage in some learning that makes us a bit uncomfortable, but we do it because we want to make sure that we are creating spaces that are wonderful spaces for our students' voices and experience to be welcome. So this is an article by CNN that was released, and it was in April that it was released. But at the time, in April, this was a reality. And I tell you that this definitely has not changed very much. And so with COVID, we've all experienced this pandemic together as a world, not just as a state, not just as a country, but as a world. And so this definitely, this title gives shock value. Staggering number of children have lost at least one parent to COVID-19, model estimates. So when we peel back this article, and I'm sorry, the QR code, you can read the entire article. In this article, the number of children experiencing a parent dying of COVID-19 is staggering, with an estimate of 37,300 to 43,000 already affected. Now, that is enough to make your eyes kind of widen. 37,300 to 43,000 already affected, children already affected. When I peel it back even more, this is even more heartbreaking. Black children are disproportionately affected, comprising only 14% of children in the US, but 20% of those losing a parent to COVID-19. This is heartbreaking. So not only are our students experiencing the loss of a parent, it's even more heartbreaking to see that it is disproportionately affecting Black children as we are in this school year. So when we think about making these connections, when we think about creating spaces that welcome in our students' voices and experiences, it is all the more important, especially because of where we are right now as a world. So Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop is known for one of the many things that she's known for, but one of the pieces of research she talks about is the idea behind windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. That we are not just thinking about books of students that look like our students, but we're thinking about the windows looking outside into other individuals' perspectives, other individuals' experiences, and then also sliding glass doors, how there are similarities. But she said, literature transforms human experiences and reflects it back to us. And in that reflection, we can see our own lives and experiences as part of the larger human experiences. Reading then becomes a means of self-affirmation. But when children cannot find themselves reflected in the books they read, or when the images they see are distorted, they learn a powerful lesson about how they are devalued in the society in which they are a part. This book is a great example of how to have these conversations about different individuals in our everyday walks of life. Milo Imagines the World is a great book that talks about this little boy going through life, seeing he's actually on a train going to see his parent. I won't spoil it for you, but he's on a train and he's looking at everyone. He's very observant, but he's seeing how everyone's experiences are different, and that maybe his assumptions on what he believed someone was experiencing wasn't actually what it was. This is a great book by Matt De La Pena, and he does a great job really pointing that out and opening up spaces to create these conversations or to have these conversations of with our students, regardless of their age. So let's start by thinking about what that looks like real time in our classroom. The first being that we have to create spaces for authentic conversations to happen. Brandon Fleming, he is the CEO of the Harvard Diversity Project. In his book, Miseducated, he talks about the idea of loving first and teaching second. That it's not just about teaching, but students need to understand that you love them first, that you care about them, that you care about their experiences, that you care about what it is that they bring, how it is that they feel, and that you are creating these spaces in the classroom for the students to have these conversations in a safe way. So in Courageous Conversations About Race by Glenn Singleton, he talks about, he provides this compass on ways that we can have courageous conversations, or things to think about when having courageous conversations about race. Now, this framework, let me say this, is not just a framework when we're talking about race, but this is a great framework when we're thinking about different assumptions or different things that we might believe about situations, about topics, and so forth. This is a great thing to think about, and also to invite our students to be reflective of how they enter into conversations. So as you can see here, there are 4 quadrants, and of these 4 quadrants, the first being believing. How do we enter into a conversation? Believing, that would be based on our beliefs, our values, our upbringing, our morals. And then it could be that we enter into conversations thinking, thinking about statistics, thinking about what the news has said, thinking about what's in black and white, what it is that we believe are factual, and that's what helps us to enter into a conversation. Another way that we can enter in is through feelings. And in the feelings, it would be, we could have a personal connection with the very topic that we're talking about, with the very experience and the experience that we're discussing, that we are a little bit closer than others may be to this. So we might be a little bit more offensive, or we might be a little more sensitive for us to talk about. It might be a little more traumatizing for us to have that conversation. And that's okay. That's something to think about as you go into a conversation. And then the last would be acting. That could be that we're going into this conversation saying, okay, how can we fix this situation? And so from that, these 4 different ways to enter into a conversation, it might be different based on the topic. It's important for us to share these things with our students so that they understand truly how they're entering into conversation, that this is a great foundation to foster empathy, to foster compassion, to foster understanding of others' perspectives, because we all enter into conversations differently. So now as we are in this school year, what impact does this have for us? I know that schools have already begun, and there is a lot of uncertainty. At first, school started off face-to-face, and now, because of an outbreak, they're back home. Now it's virtual some days, or maybe one grade level is virtual, one classroom might be virtual. And so there are so many factors and so many things that are being thrown at educators, at teachers. Let me first start by saying, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I know that this is not an easy space to be in. But as we think about us as adults, how we're navigating through this space, we also have to consider how our students are navigating in this very space. And so really thinking about having those authentic conversations in our classroom is going to be crucial when we're thinking about creating these spaces for our students. The next would be authentic connections. In my book, The Right Tools, it was said, when we don't use resources strategically, when we simply follow the path a tool lays out, we lose sight of our students. What do I mean by that? Basically, when we allow the resources or the noise or the curriculum and everything that is around us, the tests and all of those things, benchmark tests, standardized tests, all of those things to lay out a path on what our students need, we lose sight of the most important factor. That would be our students. So now we have to ask ourselves, what are some ways, when we think about authentic connections, what are some ways that we can connect with our students? Well, there are 3 things that we should think about in the classroom. What connections are we making with our students in non-academic spaces? What connections are we making with our students in academic spaces? And then also, in what ways do my connections influence my instructional planning and practice, or lack thereof? If I find that I'm not making a lot of connections, what does that mean for my planning? What implications does that have for my planning? I just had a conversation with an educator, and they expressed their frustration of having a pre-made curriculum. And yes, I know that also well. The frustration of having to do lesson plans when it's already set for them. But I pushed their thinking just a bit. And I said, okay, well, if we have this pre-made curriculum, they still don't know our students. They don't know your students. So now the question is, how do you bridge that gap? How do you make connections with your students with the very resource that you are being asked to use? So here are some practical ways to begin to create those spaces. So here's a TikTok that I did, and it kind of highlights some of these areas that you can think about when creating spaces.
No hands and no darling, I don't dance, and I'm with Roscoe, I'm with Walker, I think I deserve a chance.
So think about that. What are some practical ways? First, start off by valuing their voices, then valuing their ideas, valuing their experiences, and then also their humanity. It's not a step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. But all of these are ingredients to creating those spaces in our classrooms with our students. So when we think about creating these spaces, we cannot not consider that was a double negative. We have to consider how we are being culturally responsive. So in Zarita Hammond's book, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain, which is an amazing, amazing book, she has a framework, a ready for rigor framework. And in this framework, it is to outline, or it is to bring awareness to the culturally responsive teaching that lives throughout education, throughout the classroom, throughout the students, throughout every individual that is involved. And I love how she really just breaks it down into 4 different buckets. No, this is not a continuum. This is not a checklist. I want you to think about where you are in this work. The first being awareness. Where are you individually in this work of being culturally responsive? Knowing where you are, where your misunderstandings are, thinking about the example I gave with Charger, having a dog and not understanding just how they are, how they interact with humans. I had to get outside of my comfort zone, but I had to first acknowledge that I didn't know it all. And then you have learning partnerships. This really kind of boils down to us reimagining the student and teacher relationship, that it is a partnership, that it's not a one-way type of learning, that it's not transactional, but is actually two-way. And then information processing, providing appropriate challenges in the space to stimulate that brain growth. Thinking about Dr. Gholdy Muhammad's framework when she talks about intellect in in her 4 pillars in the historically responsive teaching framework, literacy framework that she has. She talks about intellect being one of those. What are students going to be smarter about once they leave this learning experience? What am I going to be smarter about? What am I going to know more about? And then lastly, the community of learners and learning environment. Going back to creating those spaces. How do I create spaces in my classroom so that my students are connecting with each other, that my students are connected with individuals in the school, that my students are connected with individuals in the community, that my families are connected? This is very important, that we are intentional in doing that, that it doesn't happen overnight. So where do you see yourself in this? And then lastly, authentic curriculum. Here's a quote by Cornelius Minor. Says in his book, We Got This, essentially, any curriculum that does not see my students cannot possibly be good for them. Any curriculum that is not flexible or malleable is not good for me. And any curriculum that does not teach me does not really aim to teach them. As an adult, we desire to feel seen, valued, and heard. I know for me, sitting in a meeting in which nothing pertains to me, when I was in the classroom and I had to sit in a meeting that was all about testing for younger grades, I had to just really think through why am I here? What does this connect with me? And as an adult, how often does that become a frustration of sitting in a space in which you don't feel connected to the learning? I always like to include this infographic into my presentation, because this is the reality of where our resources are being pulled from. So in 2015, you see, as far as the diversity in children's books, you see the breakdown where more than 50%, so 73% of books are with white characters, white stories, or white experiences, very much so. And then kind of trickling down to the others, animals, trucks, African Americans, and so forth. Then we go to 2018. Not that much of a difference, but it did kind of get a little bit better. Now we have half instead of 3/4. Still not good. And looking at resources now, I still don't see, and I'm sure you have experienced the same thing, where there's not a diverse offering of resources or diverse perspectives or diverse experiences in the stories that we're reading or in the resources that we are using. So this is important to know as we are using tools, strategies, and resources in our classrooms each year, that we acknowledge that this is a thing. This is something that is the reality, but that doesn't mean that we stop there. That means that we have to be even more intentional on making those changes within our curriculum, building in those questions, making sure that there are different titles that bring in others' experiences, that share other stories, that the narrative is not played out in a way that is false about certain groups of individuals, that we are bringing in those stories so that we can have those authentic conversations with our students and make authentic connections with our students. So here in Dr. Goldie Muhammad's historically responsive literacy model and her framework, here are the 4 areas that she talks about, the 4 pillars, talking about the identities, making sure that students can make connections, personal connections with the learning. Skills, we know that we have to teach skills, that skills are a way to help our students academically to become stronger and be able to advocate or use their learning for change and to navigate through the world and to be their best selves. But that is not all. It is a piece of it. The intellect, thinking about how we can create learning experiences in which students walk away becoming smarter than they walked in, that we as adults become smarter than we walked in, that we're not just delivering information, but we are creating these opportunities in which everyone can contribute to the learning. And then criticality, thinking about that learning and how we can engage our students to help them to understand power, equity, and then also anti-oppression, so that they can become change makers or they can use their voice to fight against injustice or to understand how this learning connects them to the world. So here is a question that I answered to a teacher on TikTok, and it's around the idea of expressing mutuality in the learning. This is a great question. How do you do this in a way that expresses mutuality? So I work with teachers and I tell them to talk less and listen more. I know we're told as teachers to provide the model, provide the exemplar, but when we do this, especially with Black and brown students, we create the expectation of what we want the answer to be or what we want the experience to be, and that might not be what the students have experienced. And so what we do not want to do is devalue what they're bringing to the table. So when we allow students, especially Black and Brown students, to share first, we fill the space up with their experiences, and then afterwards, if we feel the need, we can add to it at the end. Good luck. So this idea of creating spaces in which it's filled up with students' voices, students' experiences, that we are valuing them, that we help them to see that others may experience the same thing as well as others may experience different things, and that it's okay. Thinking about the authentic conversations that we're having with our students, thinking about the authentic connections that we're having with our students, and lastly, thinking about the authentic curriculum that we want our students to experience. Well, thank you so much for just your time during this session. I hope that you really think through, that this was helpful, that you think through some ways that you can make authentic connections, create authentic discussions, that you can utilize authentic curriculum with your students each and every day, taking off one bite of the elephant, small bites at a time, understanding that it doesn't happen overnight. As I said before, I thank you. We thank you for all of the things you as teachers are doing in such a crazy time in education. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all of the things that you are doing with your students. So, with that being said, be forgiving of yourself, but also push yourself, push your thinking so that you can be better, so that you can be better, not just for yourself, but for your students. Here are some ways that you can connect with me. I have a podcast, My 2 Cents Podcast. And in this podcast, I love having conversations with different educators, different roles, those that are rolling up their sleeves and they're in the thick of it, doing the work. This is a podcast for educators by educators. And in that, I have had great conversations. So please go ahead and enjoy. And it's about topics that we experience on a day-to-day basis. Also, on my social media platforms, here are some ways that you can connect with me. And if you use the QR code, it should bring you directly there. Once again, thank you so much for just your time. I share strategies, I share tips, I share different things that other educators are doing. But just know that we are all better together. Happy teaching.